Welcome to the Platform to Perform podcast, the podcast for athletes, coaches, and anyone looking to perform at their highest level. If performance is your goal, we aim to provide you with a platform to perform. I'm your host as always, Todd Davidson, and on episode 45 of the Platform to Perform podcast, I'm delighted to welcome Vern Gambetta. How are you doing today, Vern?
Doing well. Thank you for having me on. I'm looking forward to this, so it should be fun.
My absolute pleasure. I'll start things off the same way I start off every podcast, and that is inspired by Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why. But why do you do what you do, Vern?
Wow. Well, yeah, it's funny. I don't know if 50 some years ago I might have been able to articulate it. I don't know if I can articulate it well right now. I think it's more the joy and the experience of helping people. What do you do? I mean, what do you do when you're a coach, when you're a teacher? You're helping people, and that's what it comes down to. It's, you know, in this case where they're able to be able to express themselves, you know, in this case through their athletic skills as a classroom teacher, you know, have deeper and better knowledge when I was teaching history or that. So yeah, to help people. Sounds pretty idealistic, but that's me.
I like that. And if I remember rightly, and I hope I'm not confusing you with someone else, but you're perhaps not the biggest fan of the word philosophy when it comes to coaching and training athletes. But if you have any sort of key principles or whatever.
Well, no, I think you got me mixed up with somebody else. I am a big fan. I mean, philosophy is the underpinning, and that without solid core beliefs, and I learned this in California, where I grew up and went to, where all my education you go after you graduate, you go a fifth year for your teaching credential, your teaching certificate. And I had a professor then, and he said, you know, by the time we get done with this class, which was a semester length class, and by the time you're coaching for a year, if you don't have your philosophy and your core beliefs well defined, you're going to be like a ship without a rudder. So no, philosophy is really important. And my core philosophy is that that we're going to get better every day, and it's as simple as that. You know, we're going to do all the things we have to do to get better every day, and the pursuit of excellence has its own reward. So it's not about wins and losses. Those will come if you do a good job and you have certain things. But yeah, so you know, that's all it is. It's pretty simple and straightforward, but from that derives a lot of things. And then in terms of actual training, over the course of my first year's coaching, I was driven to articulate certain principles, guiding principles based on physiology, biomechanics, psychology, those, you know, all of those things, and pedagogy, science of teaching, you know, to articulate a framework as to how you were going to prepare an athlete for competition, and recognize that when I started, there was no strength and conditioning. I never had in vaguest notion that I would be labeled a strength and conditioning coach. I don't accept that label. I started out as a sport coach, as a track and field athletics coach, and my specialty was combined events, so everything. And and then because the mother of all sports is athletics, and other coaches started to see, well, you know, your kids aren't injured, your kids jump really well, but when they went to another sport, they started asking, well, what do you do? What kind of strength training do you do? What do you know, that kind of stuff. And so it gradually led toward what eventually has been labeled strength and conditioning for me. Yeah.
And there's
long answer for sorry, but
no, I love it. This give me a couple of things I want to talk about. I'll dive back into your track and field background in a second, but something that I've read in different forums, it'll talk about, for example, has somebody got 20 years experience or simply repeated the same year 20 times? As a coach with your wealth of experience, do you have any, I suppose, precise ways of reflecting on sessions, or do you keep a journal, or what does that process look like for you?
Yeah, I keep a journal. I mean, I have years of notebooks like this, usually this size, moleskin, well, now moleskin notebooks. Before that, of just thoughts, ideas that I gather and accrue, and I still write them down, regardless of whether I see them on the internet or that. There's a neurophysiological reason, I think, for writing things down to help remember them and articulate your thoughts better. Yeah, I mean, every day's training is testing and testing is training, and you evaluate every session. If you're like this morning, you asked me what I did. We had a 6 o'clock dry land session where, just at the beginning of a taper for some pretty big meets for the kids in swimming. And I didn't do a formal taper with the swim coaches. It was more kind of informal as we were walking out to the pool and the kids were getting their stuff ready and that. Just a couple of thoughts, guys, what'd you see? And we're always talking during the workout. And then I went for a walk, and an hour walk, and probably 20 minutes of it was reflecting on what the workout was today, what the week was, because we're done with this microcycle, and how that's going to fit into next week. And that's just an ongoing process. I think that's what you have to do. And I'm at a different place in my career now. I've never worked with this small a group exclusively, and the last maybe 10 years, I worked with a couple of professional beach volleyball players, and now the swim team. And there's 30 athletes here. The beach volleyball players was only 2, but I'm so used to working with larger numbers, almost all the events in track, and that it's kind of a luxury. So I think sometimes what I have to be careful of is paralysis by analysis, that excuse me, that I don't over evaluate, and take each session out of context. That's why we looked at today's session, and within today's session we had a lot of moving parts, because we have an athlete that has a swimmer who has a important meet next week, and then that, so we all did the same movements but different set and rep schemes, so that it just keeps your mental acuity up.
And is there anything, something I've got jotted down, I'm a bit annoyed at myself that I didn't write it out in full, but just as you were talking about the paralysis by analysis, I remember watching one of your webinars, and there's a thing called the centipede poem. I think it talks about hyper reflection, and I would try and read the poem from memory, but I'll end up butchering it. But do you have anything to stop that paralysis by analysis?
Yeah, I mean, and I think everybody goes through those stages in your career where you feel like you have to coach where the big toe is, and now make sure the knee's at this. I've actually heard this recently. You make sure your knee's at this angle, and by the way, look this way over your shoulder, and the athletes go, they have no idea what the hell you're talking about and what to do, and so you learn. You have to teach the movements. I mean, let's be upfront. There's a lot of this. There's a lot of movements now through, ecological learning that just say, oh, you give them the task and let them solve the problem. Yes, to a certain extent, but I want to make sure that they understand the fundamentals. But I'm going to do that with less verbal instruction and more mimicking and mirroring and using video and things like that. And I don't want to fit the athlete in a box. I mean, we do some sort of lunging every day, and I watch how they lunge, and I recognize that today I had a 6'5", 21-year-old collegiate international distance swimmer right next to a 5 foot, 110-pound girl, and the lunges look a little different. One's got really, really long legs, one's got really long torso, so you learn to fit the movement and the exercise to the athlete, rather than trying to make the athlete fit the movement, and recognize that there's no perfect technique. That they then you allow them to express themselves through the movement. And unless something just jumps out, like it's really stupid, you're going to get hurt, and I would never do that. But does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And that's been a recurring theme in previous podcasts where I've spoken to coaches and they've spoken about challenging what would be seen as traditional technique, or the right and the wrong way. And the main theme is that actually there's no singular right way. It's just, right, here's the bandwidth, and it's just acceptable, not acceptable. And actually, what is the movement outcome we're trying to achieve? In terms of, you mentioned paralysis by analysis for yourself, reflecting as a coach. Do you ever have to focus athletes on specific things? So, for example, I know Dan John talks about not being so obsessed with the minutiae of, I don't know, we're lifting 83.25% for 6 reps at 7 RPE. Do you have any tips for getting athletes to be able to focus on what's important?
Yeah, I mean, and this goes back to really getting to know the athletes. So Sarah, that's her first name. When she squat today, it's mainly body weight squat, fast body weight, not mainly, but one movement. And she's worked really hard. This kid has worked really hard, really improved. But when we speed it up, as she goes in the down phase of the squat, she tends to lose concentration more, and her knees go into valgus a little bit. And so we've just developed like a little cue system. Like sometimes I just walk by and I just tap the inside of her knee, and she, because she's thinking about just solely concentrating on being fast and not thinking about what she had to do after she got down, and getting back up. So yeah, absolutely. But it's got to be simple. It's got to be. I mean, I've used false cues. I had a world-class decathlete, and he was an okay hurdler. That wasn't his best event. Not as flexible as he needed to be. Played American football and had some niggles that we just couldn't get rid of. And I'd stand between the 5th and the 6th hurdle, and I'd yell, "Jump!" And this one coach said, "I thought you knew what you were talking about." And I do. I said, "I know my athletes. You don't jump the hurdle." But if I didn't say jump, Scott would literally just run. He was a big guy, would run through the hurdle. For some reason he would set, and that. So, you work out what you have to do to get your athlete, to the finish line in an optimum position. And I want to emphasize, let's go back, that we make sure that, each athlete has a technical model, a good, clear idea of the technical model of what they're trying to achieve it can be in their sport, and it also can be in that exercise. I mean, squatting, we do what we call a squat routine. It's 7 as a warm up for our total body and legs day when we do that. And there's also a lunge routine, and it's 7 different types of squats: narrow stance, wide stance, all kinds of things like that. So they're conversant with the idea of proportionally bending ankle, knee, hip from all kinds of different positions with their upper body in that, because that's what you're going to run into. And that's driven by this concept that great athletes can make the necessary shapes and change shapes rapidly without any conscious thought. And so that's part of the robustness, is getting them to be able to, and squatting is as fundamental a movement as you're going to have. If you can't bend, the biggest thing that I see today is a lot of youngsters that come in, they're so tight from sitting and so tight from wearing high heel shoes that they can't squat with their heels flat. So, it's a process. It's a 4 or 5 month process to get them where they can break parallel and, and use this ankle knee hip relationship, So.
And I know as strength and conditioning coaches, maybe sometimes we're obsessed too much over exact progressions and regressions. But with your guys, you just mentioned in the 7 different types of squats, how do you build into that, if that makes sense? So for example, I'm sure that on the first day you might not chuck all of that at them. But yeah, how do you build up to that?
I mean, you just take a basic squatting movement, and that's all you do. And with support, something like that. And I mean, these are real simple, 3 or 4 of them you can do on day one. You do on day one, you hold your hands overhead, your arms are here, your arms are right, your arms are left, things like that. So, you try to make it as simple as possible. And we tell them the objective is, the biggest thing I want you to do, and then I'll bring somebody up or I'll demonstrate. I can still demonstrate enough. And I'll show them from the front, the side, and the back. And I'm going to say, this is how it should look. Let's try that. Look at your partner. Look at what they're doing. Okay. What do we have to adjust? If you can't squat with your heels flat, then what we'll do is we widen the stance first. Okay. Until you can. If you tend to go into valgus with your knees, how do we do that? How do we cue that? Yeah, so you have a pretty defined progression with branches off of that, and then you always have a colleague of mine, Steve Merlin, calls it dial up or dial down. Dial up is the progression, and dial down is the regression. So if you get to step 4, and they could do 1, 2, 3, they get to step 4, and they can't, they really struggle with step 4. You go back to step 3, and then you reevaluate.
And you mentioned there about your swimmers just doing bodyweight squats as an example. If we shift gears into strength training, then you've probably got one of my favorite definitions of strength training that I think also acts to break down the notion that strength training is just barbells or is just dumbbells. How do you define strength training?
Well, coordination training with appropriate resistance to produce force, reduce force. I can't remember the other part. Move an object. So, if you're a prop in rugby or whatever, American lineman. And what's the other one? Produce. Yeah, I mean, that's basically it. You get the idea. The key thing is coordination training with appropriate resistance, not maximal resistance. What's appropriate for a distance swimmer, like this 6'4" kid, is maybe not as appropriate as would be for a sprint swimmer in this case. And my rule of thumb that's a corollary to that definition is we will never sacrifice range of motion or speed of movement for resistance. Say it again, we'll never sacrifice speed of movement or range of motion for resistance. Because if you do that, then the end, here, I'm going to give you the right definition. Now that bugs me. I don't know why I had a brain cramp. Coordination training with appropriate resistance to handle body weight first, project an implement, and that can be as light as a golf ball or whatever, strike an implement. Move or resist movement of another body, resist gravity, and optimize ground reaction forces. And as far as I know, that covers everything that we do in sport and in life on this planet anyway. So, and then as I said, the corollary is we're gonna, now we start with percentage of body weight, and I would do the same thing. I have a lot of colleagues in rugby and American football, and they start with percentage of body weight, and some of them end up lifting really, really heavy because that's appropriate for their sport and where they play on the pitch, so that's important. Sorry for the brain cramp.
No, it's all right. I didn't want to jump in and correct you and steal your.
Oh no, you should. I'm not beyond correction, believe me.
And I'm going to try and remember where I was with that. Yeah, the reason why I like it is because I put a post on my social media a few months ago, and it was about that definition of strength training, and it was aimed at parents who are perhaps anti kids getting strong or assume that strength equals bodybuilding or something ridiculous like that.
Right.
But I said, would you be okay if we develop their ability to handle body weight? Would you be okay if we develop their ability to project an implement? So I don't know, a shot put, javelin, whatever. And the idea is you go through the list and they probably say, yes, that's fine, that's fine, that's fine, that's fine. And then you get to the, I don't know, barbells once you've exhausted all those coordination style progressions. And then it's like, oh no, I don't like that. And it's like, well, you're okay for them to be, I don't know, tackled by a kid who's an early maturer, who's 6'4" and biologically 18, but you're not happy with the resistance of a, I don't know, a goblet squat or whatever.
Yeah, for sure.
And you mentioned about, one of the things you've mentioned about in previous podcasts is the seductiveness of strength training. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on
well, yeah, no question. And look, I'm 74 years old, but I can remember it like yesterday when I started weight training. And, I was, let's see, 62. I was 16 years old, 16 and a half years old, and you're secreting testosterone, more testosterone in a day than Lance Armstrong took in a month, and you take advantage of that. And my God, for that first phase, right, that first 6-8 weeks, you just can't help but look, every day you're getting stronger, right? And you look in the mirror and all of a sudden you see, you look different, you look better, and you get caught in that. And it's easy to lock yourself in the weight room and chase numbers because it's achievable. And so that's why I say the seductiveness of it, in that, it's like you're always coming to crossroads in terms of developing the athlete. And you come to this particular crossroad, and the right crossroad is, let's go spend more time in the weight room, let's get heavier. Left crossroad says, okay, now we've got to do some more, we've got to get away from that general strength. We've got to do some more special or specific strength. We've got to do more sport appropriate movements. Well, it's a lot easier to go to the right and see numbers go up quicker than it is to go down the left-hand path, which is less measurable and takes longer. And that's what, so that's where the seductiveness of it is. So.
Yeah, I like what you're saying there as well, because I think of the analogy of, I don't know, getting to the top of the ladder and then realizing it was against the wrong wall, and think that in theory, if you had a youth athlete do everything that you asked them to do from a strength perspective, you could get them to this, I don't know, mythical, and I'm doing the little air quotations, mythical 2 times body weight back squat or whatever.
Sure.
You could probably get them there with about, I don't know, making this up now, but 3 to 5 years of training. But then you're like, oh, actually, are there other qualities that we needed to develop, and we got them strong enough or appropriately strong, but actually, I don't know, they've missed out this part of their athletic development.
Yeah, and again, it's I've never been in 53 years of coaching. I've never had unlimited time to train an athlete, and in athletics, a lot of times it was just because we had the technical component, but in professional sports, the time was, you'd think there'd be more, but it was less. So you have to really prioritize what were you doing relative to the athlete's stage of development, relative to where they were, in terms of their actual technical capabilities in the sport and that, so it's really important to, to consider that. That being said, I worked with a national caliber girls volleyball team here in Venice, Florida, just south of us, and worked with them for 4 years. And at the end of the third year, by the end of the third year, every kid not every kid, the top group could squat, 1.5 times body weight for 3 reps, in a good parallel. I wouldn't say full squat wasn't necessary, and that. Was that an upfront objective? Did it make them better? Let's say first, did it make them better? It didn't make them better directly, because we achieved everything we wanted with the percentage of body weight and all the different progressions. But you know what it did? It was a tremendous boost to their confidence. They just, when they achieved that, they just, there was nothing that was going to stop them. and we didn't try to go any farther than that. We went to different um, uh, spectrum squats, different things like that, where they'd earned the right to do.
And just going back to a point you made previously, you said that you'd never sacrifice range of motion or speed of movement. What's your thoughts on, and I know you love to critique research articles, what's your thoughts on, for example, the research that says you can do, for example, a heavy quarter squat and that might transfer more to, I don't know, jumping or sprinting because of the joint angles involved?
Well, I mean, it does to a certain extent, but how much transfer relative to the time you have to invest? I mean, look, 56 years ago, 57 years ago, when I was playing college football, I was doing quarter at 195 pounds. What's that? 90 kilos, a little over 90 kilos. I was doing quarter squats with 600 pounds almost. Was it worth it? No. I mean, and I know what the research says, and those research studies are correct in the narrow range of what they're looking at in the population they're looking at. But you don't have to do that. You're going to get better return by jumping, and jumping with a percentage of body weight and making sure you don't slow it down so much. Now, I understand that your brain still tries to recruit at maximum speed. I get that, but there's still, I'm getting what I call gaposis, that gap between where you are there and what you have to express on the volleyball court or on the pitch or something, so.
I think, and that also leads, I wonder if you're going to give a similar answer, because I've heard you talk about it before, but there's definitely a research bias towards, for example, stuff like Nordics in terms of the amount of papers that has been produced proclaiming them to, I suppose, be the panacea of reducing hamstring injuries. But what is your thoughts on the Nordic?
Well, yeah, I'm very outspoken, and nobody yet has proven to me. First of all, the original study that started the whole thing, and this is where you have to really, really know your stuff, have an open mind, be willing to ask questions. The original study in my book was flawed. Okay, they the other group did normal. The first one group did Nordic hamstring curls twice a week, or maybe even, I don't remember now. I should know. Twice a week. And the other group did, there was no control group, and the other did normal soccer training. Well, what's normal soccer training? I mean, you have to define what you do. And then it took off. And I in 1975, we experimented with what now is called the Nordic hamstring movement. And for a while, it was called the Russian hamstring movement. We did it out in Santa Barbara, a bunch of us decathletes. And within three weeks, the four of the people that did them had hamstring pulls. And one guy had an avulsion and was out for the year. And I just go, I'm not in the extreme soreness you get. So that made me wary. So when I saw that starting to happen, obviously you're limited by your experience, and I had a bias against it. But I go, okay, let's look at the literature. Let's look at it. And if you really delve into the literature, look at the studies. First of all, it puts tremendous strain on the distal attachment of the hamstrings. Remember, there's more than one hamstring muscle, and and it doesn't. And then now people are said, well, we've got to target short head or long head or the bicep femoris. So what do we have to do? The body doesn't work that way. The body does not. It does not look at individual muscles. It looks at muscle synergy. And that's how it works. So you're trying to isolate a muscle. It's just like a leg curl, except you're accentuating the eccentric. So they're saying, well, it's eccentric strength. It's not eccentric strength either. If you really look at go outside the Nordic hamstring research, and you look at all the studies done, biomechanical studies, both kinetic and kinematic studies done on sprinting, we know that, yes, the hamstring works eccentrically to help decelerate the foreleg, but there's also an instantaneous isometric action there that occurs. And there's a period of quiet when the hamstring isn't completely active. Now I'm generalizing because I'm not talking about semimembranosus versus tendinosis versus bicep femoris. But so, and then the third one is, I'm not the smartest tool in the shed, sharpest tool in the shed. But when somebody tells me that an exercise is going to reduce injuries and significantly reduce injuries, and then I look at statistics, and I'll use Australian rules football as an example, who publicly publishes been publishing their injury statistics for the last 12, let's say 10, but I think it's 12 years. And and that's where the origin of the Nordic hamstring, even though it was invented in, supposedly in Oslo or something, but they really embraced it. And that's the home of the Nord board and all of that. And they test. Their hamstring injuries have not reduced. In fact, they haven't flatlined. Every year they go up. Well, wouldn't that force you? I mean, as a coach, I'm gonna ask the hard question. I'm investing time to prevent hamstring injuries by doing this particular exercise, and my hamstring injuries aren't declining. I rest my case. So what do you do for hamstrings? First of all, I don't train the hamstrings. We train the hamstrings as part of movements, okay, we'll do lunges in all three planes. We'll do single leg squats. We do step ups. And now the same group has discovered that high speed running, which I don't know what high speed running is, either you sprint or you run, but sprinting inoculates you against hamstring pulls. Hello? I could have told you that even when I was, 50 years ago, before I had very much experience. So why, and yet everybody has to, you go through, you're in England, go through the majority of your rugby teams there, your soccer teams. You said you worked at English Institute. Everybody tests now on the Nord board because it generates these nice, cute numbers. And then what do you do with the numbers? Train on the Nord board. So you get stronger on the Nord board, but you still have hamstring injuries. Okay. So, I'm pretty passionate about it, and I'm waiting for somebody to prove me wrong. And so far I was told by Engage, the scientist in Norway, and the guys in Australia, and they said, well, you're just a coach. Well, that's fine. I have to produce. You produce papers. I have to produce results.
Very
nice. My case.
Very nice. And it's funny because just hearing you talk, I'm reminded of a coach I worked under at GB Boxing, and he used to work in rugby. And he said one of the players came to him one time and said, we've been doing all these sprints and I'm not getting any faster. What's the point? And he said, well, the point is we need to expose you to this level of hamstring stress, because at some point it becomes more about injury reduction as well as a performance quality. I also think there's a danger of, and I've been guilty of this at times, especially when you read books about like triphasic training and stuff like that, you can become so pigeonholed, or you dive into the rabbit hole and they're not strong enough. Oh, what type of strength? Oh, it's eccentric strength. Oh, well, we need to, and then you come so far removed from performance that you wonder whether this isolated quality really is giving you what you think it is.
And triphasic strength it's a great marketing term, but within, just as I move my arm here, the listeners can't hear, move my arm, I have an isometric, isotonic, and eccentric contraction. And sometimes I have a different, at the origin or the insertion of the muscle, I have different action. So how can you isolate that out? Now we will do what I call, and I learned this from a French biomechanist, Gilles Comity, who's passed away at a conference in 1987. It's all the stuff that Werner Gunther did that people like to call French contrast training. And it's, you do an isometric squat for X amount of time, then you do a loaded squat, and then maybe you do a jump squat. And there's a particular phase of training that we'll do it in. I know what the results are in my system. Different of my colleagues use it at different places. it's, it's really effective, but that's not triphasic. That's just taking advantage of certain muscle actions to accentuate qualities you want to bring out.
And if we go on to the movements, not muscles topic a little bit more, it's funny because I had this thought a while ago about how some coaches might say that, but then, for example, they use Nordics, they use side planks, and you're like, well, hang on a minute, you're using that argument, but you're including these exercises. Yeah. So I want to talk about your thoughts on core training, and I know you don't like the term, but do you want to just talk about how you go about training, I suppose, everything between the knees and the neck?
Train everything from toenails to fingernails, so not the knees and the neck. And all training is core training. Last time I checked, we've evolved from a lower species. We don't drag our knuckles on the ground. We walk upright and bipedal, and it's bipedal. And if you look at it, if you look at walking or running from in front, you see, one leg go in front of the other, and you'll see one shoulder counteract the movement of the hips, maybe by going, just the opposite. And so I don't particularly like the term core training. I'll accept it until we can come up with something better. I like to call it, and we actually do call it postural strength, because what we're interested in is these postures and poses, shapes, as we say, that we have to make in various sports. And movement occurs through the center of the body, not from the center of the body. We starts usually off the ground, or sometimes it's initiated from above in certain athletic movements and that kind of stuff. So we have to learn how to attenuate forces that are generated off the ground or generated from the top down. And movement occurs in all three planes: frontal, sagittal, and transverse. So our postural strength work, even for swimming, I would say that 90% of our postural strength work is standing and moving with various types of implements and resistance, and even partner resistance. And only about 15% is done in prone and supine positions, because if you take and that's it. And that being said, holding a plank is for 10 seconds, whatever, is pointless. It's unless you're getting in a plank holding contest. And I would venture to say, I could total it up because we set it up all in modules. This week, the kids probably did no less than about 2,000 reps of between 1,500 and 2,000 reps of postural strength work from different positions. Working on decelerating the trunk, accelerating, extension, flexion, lateral flexion, all those kinds of movements. So that area that you said, I didn't want to sound like a put down, but between your shoulders and your knees, where it's the transmission of the car, so to speak. It's so strong and so robust that we can handle all these different postures that we have to use. And in swimming, it's all relatively slow and controlled because of the water. But think about rugby, and think about soccer, and think about American football, where if you're not strong through from shoulders to the knees, you're not going to be able to attenuate all those forces that you have to impart and you have to absorb. So
do you ever have any oh, sorry,
no, go ahead.
I was going to say, do you ever have any kickback from swimming coaches who are like, right, well, they're horizontal in the water, so why are they stood up on 2 feet? What's your counter to that?
My counter is that don't work with them. and we beat them. I mean, last Saturday we had a pretty big meet here, and I just sat up in the stands and watched. And our kids walk out. Obviously, the guys have, the women have longer suits on, but in practice they don't. And our kids, they're so ripped, and we don't do any, trunk flexion is, I think we did how many reps of some sort of sit up. I think about 30 reps last week. And these kids are ripped and lean and fit. And that's what you want. And Carmel Swim Club, and Carmel High School was the record for most state championships in a row. There was just a clip on TV, on Twitter this morning. State championship this morning. They're in the gym next to the pool, doing a dumbbell complex and medicine ball throws. So go ahead, you do your planks, and we'll do our stuff. And if our talent is equal, we'll beat you. So I sound like a crotchety old man, but I'm past the point that I feel like I have to convince people of something. If they want to believe that, go ahead, waste your time. If I've got a minute of training, I want to make the athlete better, not make them tired. So, and I understand the research. I've read all the research. There's a methodology and a method behind what we do. People call it fascial slings. There's a lot of different names. That's what we're talking about, So it's not some off the wall madman sitting in a swamp in Florida chasing alligators, So that's right.
Brilliant. And if we just diverge slightly into another buzzword in strength conditioning is the word robust. But if we talk a little bit about creating robust athletes, do you have, I suppose, your own definition of what you view robustness as?
Oh yeah, I love the term robust. Robust and resilient, R&R, man. I mean, that's what it's all about. And robust means you can handle. You have a high level of trainability, so that you can handle the load in practice. It's kind of trainability and work capacity overlap, right? That you can handle the load as you progress through the system, and therefore, when you get in the competitive situation, the competitive cauldron that Anson Dorrance, the women's soccer coach at North Carolina, calls it, you're ready to handle any eventuality, anything that happens. That one time you get caught on one leg and you got to look over your shoulder and your knee goes into valgus, you don't tear your ACL. And sometimes it happens. Sometimes shit happens. You got to accept that. But no, I mean, now it's become a buzzword, which is fine. That's fine. But that doesn't mean I won't use it because we know what robust and resilient means, and you're going to bounce back. I mean, for example, now in swimming, you got to swim fast in the morning. You got to swim fast at night, and you got to swim when you come to Olympic trials. Our best girl is going to swim 5 events. So that's 10 swims minimum over 4 days, and so you better be robust, because if you swim fast in the morning and you make the final and you're 8th in the final, you're watching the Olympics on TV next to me.
And you mentioned work capacity there, something I've got jotted down from, I think it's the All Things Strength and Wellness podcast, but it says that you like to think of work capacity as things that might limit an athlete's ability to do other things. Yes. Do you want to just speak on that for a minute or so?
Yeah. I mean, I haven't changed my thoughts on that, and that evolved over quite a few years, probably until, I'd say the early 90s or mid 90s. So obviously various types of endurance, aerobic, anaerobic, if I don't have that, well, and that's required in the sport, then I've got to build up that capacity. Certainly flexibility or effective range of motion around the joint can be limiting. So that's work capacity. That limits my ability to do other work. Things like that. And so that's what I look at. So we're always going to address that on a systematic basis. Sometimes we address it as there's been why I don't know, but I've noticed now all of a sudden microdosing is controversial, and I never liked the term because it conjures up images of the Oregon Project and drugs and things like that. I call them minis. I used to call them minis. So if like, for example, if I'm really deficient in some aspect of flexibility at a joint that's going to limit my performance, say in fast bowling or something like that, well, then I'm going to design a mini routine for me or for you to do, to improve that. And if it's, if I'm constantly running out of gas in the last 3 minutes of the match, well, then I've got to start doing things to improve. And probably what I'm doing is I'm not able to, my work capacity isn't high enough that I can do enough in training yet to be able to address that. So that has to become an emphasis. Right.
Yeah, it's like you hear from a lot of sports. I mean, my sport when I was growing up was boxing, and a classic one is like you don't box to get fit; you need to be fit to box. And saying that actually you need that underlying, I mean, work capacity, I guess, to then make the most out of the technical side of things.
Right, and that's what work capacity underlies trainability, and trainability is the things that have in a sense, higher quality movements, a higher degree of transfer, possibly, to your sport. I mean, you think about, I took a combatives class my freshman year in college, and we ended up having to box three 1-minute rounds, 16-ounce gloves. Well, I only lasted 45 seconds before I got knocked down. But we do, just shadow box. Just take a 16, or something, a pound. Just put a pound in your hand and try to hold your hands up for 3 minutes. Not even punch and not get hit. And I mean, I have tremendous respect for the degree of fit. People look at boxing, some of the traditional boxing training, and they go, "That's really stupid." Well, some of it is a little over the top. But when you think about, I got to get ready, I'm going to get hit, and I'm, and I got to keep my hands up, and I got to throw punches, man. It's I'm not telling you,
It makes me laugh because just thinking about, for example, punching with really light dumbbells is very easy. And I think we do this a lot in strength and conditioning, where we put our strength and conditioning hat on and then look at something and call it stupid. But actually, for example, I've spoken to boxing coaches who are like, no, we're not using the dumbbells to get quicker. We're using that because the second you get tired and your hands drop, then you're in trouble.
You're done.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure I've been guilty of looking at other sports and being like, well, that's stupid. And you're like, well, hang on a minute.
Oh, I have to. And I'm still stupid enough that I make comments about some things that I see at various times when I don't really know why they're doing. I've tried to rein that in a little bit more, until you get to know the sport and understand. And I'm willing to accept, as long as it doesn't add stress to stress, that, there are certain things that are traditional in the sport, and it's passed down from generation to generation, as long as that doesn't detract from what making you better, so baseball's like that, cricket's like that. There are certain things that they're going to do, and they're going to do no matter what they, how well that it's different, so you try to build a wall around it.
Exactly. And I think you were on Steve Ingham's podcast a while ago, and I think it's in his one of his books, where he says if there's such a huge psychological attachment to something within that sport, then even though your strength and conditioning research paper might say, I don't know, don't warm up with static stretching or I don't know, whatever, but they've always done it before a big competition, then taking that away can sometimes be more harmful than the physical.
Well, yeah, and talking to Steve about that in his first book was brilliant. And that, so I understand that static stretching can potentially have a negative effect on explosive power. But and foam rolling definitely does. But if it makes you feel good, then what I try to do, I've had a conversation the other day with one of the athletes, asked me about, because we don't do foam rolling as a group, and he asked me because he saw a world-class swimmer on on the internet, and I said, yeah, it makes you feel good, right? I said, fine, tonight for study breaks, go ahead and foam roll. It's not going to hurt him, but it doesn't help you, And I'm jealous about time. I want to, if I have 20 minutes, I want to make you 20 minutes better, not 20 minutes tired.
Absolutely. And I want to tap into something you mentioned earlier. You talked about your minis and you spoke about your experience as a decathlete. When you're training for multiple events and you don't have unlimited time, logistically, how do you go about for example, training a decathlete?
Well, it's constant compromise, and you have to accept that. And the beauty of the decathlon that's really cool is you have a scoring table, and that guides everything. So if I'm, and they're somewhat disproportionate. You really get more points per centimeter in the jumps than you do in the throws and that. So you have to look at what you have, and then you prioritize your training. So at various phases of the training, it might be week event, or a various day, it might be week event emphasis. Well, and that's what I've taken, because I didn't do decathlon in college. I did it after college to learn how to be a better coach, and that's had a huge influence on my coaching today. So, for example, the really good woman that we have here is one of the best in the world in the 400 IM. So you have fly, backstroke, breaststroke, and then freestyle. Well, she's not equally good in each, and they have different technical demands and different. So, at certain times, Brent, the head coach, it's more one drill is emphasized more than another. We've done certain phases in our dryland strength training to enable her to improve her butterfly. We've emphasized certain things almost to the exclusion of others. So I guess it's two things. It's a constant compromise, and constantly monitoring your athletes, so you see how they're progressing, both in training and in competition, and recognize that there it's just this kind of give and take, that sometimes you have to, you can't get it all done, and that's why the perfect race has never been run. The perfect game has never been played. That's what's so exciting. You asked at the beginning. That's what's so exciting about doing what we're doing. We're seeking perfection with this existential understanding that we're never really going to achieve it. It's going to be the best. You can break the world record and think about 3 different things you could have done differently, and I've seen that happen, so it's cool. I mean, some people find that really depressing, and I find that, very, very challenging in a positive manner.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I'm sure Roger Federer has a similar quote about why he loves tennis, and saying he wants to play the perfect game, but he knows it'll never happen, or something like that.
Yeah.
And again, on the track and field side of things, something I also want to talk about is, I'm sure there's psychologists with a better term for this, but I guess psychological robustness. So I heard you speak on another podcast where you spoke about taking sprinters or track and field athletes to a different track a few weeks before the meet, to switch them on a little bit. Do you want to talk about how you came to this line of thought?
Well, that was a long time ago, and it became a tradition too, that when we got down to our last 3 competitions, and in California, this was high school athletes, California state meet is equivalent of, well, not to put down England or something like that, but England certainly stronger than England school championships. You have the top 27 kids in each event in California, and Jeff Gowan, the late Jeff Gowan, who was English athletics coach and then later head of Sport Canada, used to have a great statement that 90% of the U.S. Olympic team comes from California, and the other 10% are left home in California, or something to that effect. So you get the idea. But no, the idea is when you get down and the peaking tapering phase, that's when the art of coaching really takes over. You're taking advantage of your work, and I've made as many mistakes as anybody. I've lost national championships by doing too much. It took me a long time to learn that at that time, if in doubt, do one less run, one less rep, one less lift, or whatever it is. But you give them, in this case, we went to a really good track, okay, where they were just by going on that track, and there was world-class athletes out there, so it perked them up. It gave them a different look because, we trained all this time. So, and you can do that in track. I was the head coach. I mean, it's tough to do in a lot of other sports. I mean, we're not going to go to a different pool, in that. So, but it's, you can maybe adapt it, so.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for that. I mean, I've spoken to friends of mine about the club that I used to box for, and when we transitioned into a newer gym, and it was weird, you couldn't quite put your finger on it, but the hunger had kind of disappeared because all of a sudden we had loads of equipment and it was really fancy. Whereas our old gym, it was like you had to run and get the nice gloves first. But yeah, environment plays a huge role.
Yeah, well, environment, that's a better way to put it. Brilliant way you just said it. Environment plays a huge role. And, you try to create an environment everywhere you go where champions are inevitable. If I brought 90% of the coaches that work dry land and swimming, and they came where we were this morning. Now, it was cold in Florida. You're going to laugh. I have to convert this to centigrade, but it was 50 degrees this morning, 48 degrees. And, so everybody had sweatpants on, and, but normally it's not, but it's outside. The dumbbells are outside. Everything's outside. So a couple of weeks ago, it was cold. I mean, it was, and that's our way. That's the Sharks way, and I always felt, I think, to have a air conditioned weight room that's, so pristine and so perfect, it's okay. I mean, but I like, that's part of the robustness. That's part of the, creating a mental edge, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. And just changing tact a little, I've heard you speak about this before, but over specialization and how people confuse transfer of training with specificity of training.
Yeah, I mean, that's really a pet peeve of mine. Look, the specificity, you're a boxer, that means you box. Now there's more, but as you know, hitting a heavy bag is not the same as getting in the ring and sparring. It looks like boxing, but I mean, if you box against me, it'd be like hitting a heavy bag because I couldn't move or something. Okay, so granted, but that isn't the case. So the highest form of preparation for cricket bowling is to bowl, okay, or hitting is to hit, and so that's where I've now more and more using the term appropriate. Now, there's various overhead activities that I'll do with the medicine ball that are similar, but they're not the same. I'm not trying to imitate the sport movement. I'm trying to prepare you for the sport movement, okay? I can't imitate butterfly stroke on dry land, but we know now, we just had that conversation, the coaches and I had that conversation this morning. We know now that we can appropriately strengthen this young man or young woman so that now they can go in the pool and they can do higher quality work and to a certain extent higher volume work if necessary. And now the optimum, Todd, really the optimum for me is when you work with a coach where you're blending. John Pryor, who's a mate of mine, colleague of mine in Australia, and he worked with Eddie Jones extensively with Japan Rugby and Centauri Rugby. And they might have 8 minutes of speed development leading right into a rugby drill, leading right into 5 minutes of scrimmaging. And I've been able to do that sometimes in various sports too. That's when you get the best transfer, I think, but it's a hell of a lot of work, and a lot of coaches are not willing to do that for various reasons. I'm talking, sport coaches, you have to be marching in lockstep, and it's, So, but I'm convinced that's the way to go. And I know I've been able to do that a couple of times myself in my career, and consult with some people that have done it, and the results are just tremendous, so and I think we're moving toward that. We're moving in that direction more and more. People are starting to understand that, there's the weight room can be a dark hole. You can go off and run in the forest, and that can be a dark hole, or, all these places. How do I get more ROI, return on investment?
Do you think, I'm just picturing what you're saying there, do you think there's something psychological to be said in terms of buy-in about having this athletic development, strength conditioning, call it what you will, and the technical training occurring either simultaneously or in the same place?
Yeah, no question. And you can talk to the people that have done it. I mean, I'm not as current what they're doing exactly with English rugby now, but I knew up until the World Cup, one of my colleagues, until about 4 months before the World Cup, was a performer. I know what they did then. And I know Eddie, there was a podcast I was listening to with Eddie Jones the other day, and he talked about what they did with Japan Rugby with John Pryor. Yeah, and so the degree of buy-in is just tremendous. I mean, when I've seen it in swimming, I've seen it in baseball, I've seen it in basketball, I've seen it in rugby, I've seen it in cricket, and it can be done, but and at the end of the day, there's good motor learning principles behind it, good pedagogical principles, and good physiological principles in terms of adaptive responses. So you're not dulling the stimulus, you're keeping the stimulus pretty sharp.
And in terms of pedagogy, just a couple of questions before we wrap up. So I've got down here that routine is part of consistency, and I know you're obviously massive on doing the basics, doing the fundamentals. Is there any particular routines you have with your athletes? And my second part of the question is, how do you find the sweet spot between the consistency of routine while still keeping them psychologically excited to train?
Well, when you find that, tell me, okay? No, just kidding, because I mean, that's, so yeah, I mean, you come, you do mini band routine, you do walking rotations minimum every day, or some small variation of those. So there's what we do is, I'll just use swimming for example, but it'd be the same if I were working with rugby or something like that. So we'd have an A and a B and a C warm up that's matched up to what's going to happen in sport practice that day. And so, and those are touching on all the fundamental movements that you have to have. First of all, just getting everything connected, toenails to fingernails, and then preparing you for what's going to happen in rugby or cricket or swimming or whatever. And it's a fairly narrow range of, we're not trying to create a circus. So it's a fairly narrow range of what you do. And the danger that happens is it becomes mundane. And I like to have the consistency, because training is testing and training. And so when they walk in the gate or they walk in the door or whatever it is, I'm really watching how they're doing, the quality of movement of what they're doing on these movements. So that gives me feedback on yesterday's training, their readiness for today's training. Okay. Now, that being said, for example, this morning, now there's kids here that have been through this program. They started at 11 years old and they're 19.
Wow. So
this morning, we did a lot of the same movements, and usually it's Saturdays. Saturdays and Mondays are our earliest. Mondays are 5:30 in the morning. And so I'll lead it, and I'll pick, I know what I want to do, and I'll pick like 6 different movements that give me the feedback that prepare them for the dryland strength training workout to follow, which is going to prepare them for the subsequent swim. So that's how you ward off some of the boredom factor. I mean, the hardest, who gets bored the most is me. It's the coaches. I said to one kid, I said, how many times do you think I've seen miniband and walking rotation? I do it myself in my own training, So, we have to guard against that. But the great ones that I've seen across sports, we're talking about Hall of Fame athletes, Olympic medalists and that kind of stuff. They're like clockwork. They just do the mundane for some reason. It doesn't bother them. And so as a teacher coach, we have to inspire, motivate the athlete to understand that this is an important part of what they do.
Yeah, and I think again, might be Dan John, it might be somebody else, that he's like, oh, are you bored of winning medals? No, didn't think so. Okay, right, let's not get bored with the basics then.
Well, yeah, Emil Zatopek, Czech, great runner, 48 and 52 Olympics. And one time, I think it's 3 weeks, I think he did 3 weeks every day, 40 times 400. And so I this was a tweet I put up, but I actually used this with an athlete. I said, how'd you like to get in the pool or on the track and do 40 times 400 3 weeks in a row? And when they come and they say, this is boring, that's what I lay on them, So when he stood on the top of the podium and the national anthem played, those 40 times 400, made the difference. So Kieran Perkins, the great Australian distance swimmer, I've been told this. I can't verify that, but I've been told it enough people that I know it's true. Every Monday in his career, from the time he broke into the world-class level, and that was quite a long period of time, he did the same workout. Every Tuesday, he did the same workout, and that. I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that as a coach. I couldn't do that as an athlete. But it worked for him, and he had the mentality that he could do it, So, it's, we have to find ways. We have to find the keys. We have to find what works for each athlete, and that's the really fun part of coaching. That's the art of it. And sometimes sometimes it might even look a little crazy, but that's what you do, as long as it's legal and you figure out what you have to do. So.
Absolutely. And just in wrapping up, so I've only got four questions left. So the first one is, if you could have one key take home for the listeners of this podcast, so whether it's technical coaches, athletes, strength and conditioning coaches, teachers, what would that take home be?
Ask better questions. Why are you doing what you're doing? You should be able to come to my workout and ask me why I'm doing this. If I can't give you a reason, I shouldn't do it.
Very nice, very nice. And if you could, by all means, name different coaches, different fields, but if you could observe one coach at the moment working with their athletes, who would you like to observe and why?
Wow. That's an interesting question, because I've got about on my, when the pandemic, if it ever ends or whatever, I'm not a big, even though I played American football, I'm not a big fan of American football. But Nick Saban, the coach at Alabama, kind of American football coach at Alabama, kind of intrigues me. That would be one person. I wish he's still around, but he's not coaching day-to-day. Rick Charlesworth, who was the women's field hockey and then men's field hockey coach of Australia. Gosh, I'm going to insult somebody by not mentioning. I mean, I've got a list of. I mean, that's what I love to do. When I go to Australia, my wife and the family never went. I just sit out at the Oval or something and just sit there and watch workouts by the hour. Just to see different coaches coach. I love to watch coaches coach. So I got to spend 7 days with Melbourne Storm last year, and their head coach, it was really cool, really, really cool watching, so yeah. So I don't know if I've answered that quite appropriately.
No, that's perfect. I mean, I've many guests either struggle to limit to one, or they're like I had somebody say, "Oh, can I say somebody who's passed away?" I was like, "Yeah, sure. You take the question whichever way you want."
Yeah.
And if you had one recommended resource for listeners, it could be a book, a podcast, an app, whatever.
Well, again, books. I was thinking about this morning when I was walking. I got to put out my revised list, and it's now huge. But I'm gonna do something I never do. It's totally self-serving. Go to thegainnetwork.com, get involved in Gain. It's not about me. The G is Gambetta, but that's going away more and more. And it's an incredible network of professionals around the world in physical education, sports medicine or athletic medicine, athletic development, and coaching. And it's a tremendous human resources. And unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we haven't been able to have our annual event now. We won't even this year, but look at the website, look at the resources there. And I think you're going to see people that have skin in the game and are not afraid to talk about successes and failures, and that. So, and that's not me usually to self-promote, but I'm going to. I think I just came to the realization twice this week of how blessed I am to have the people in the network that I can email, Zoom with, whatever. Eddie Jones came to Gain and sat in the audience. How much more of an endorsement do you have to have? And took notes, and that. So, Eddie's we're not bosom buddies. We know each other, but 3 weeks ago, I got Eddie and Ron Adams, who's a colleague, 1 year younger than me, kind of the elder statesman of NBA coaches with the Warriors, and we had an hour and a half Zoom call, talking about coaching, and that wouldn't have happened without the Gain Network.
Yeah, and I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with self-promoting when you've got the likes of yourself and Eddie Jones in there. And finally, how can people reach out to you if they want to get in touch or want to see more of what you do?
Yeah, we've got to do a better job. I realized that there's a URL, gambetta.com, which is still active. And people email me there, and I never get it because it goes to some account somewhere. So my email is G as in go, S as in Sam, T as in Tom, S as in Sam, coach@gmail.com. gstscoach@gmail.com. I'm on WhatsApp. People want to message me. You can just search for me and I'm on there. Hopefully there's no other Vern Gambettas. You never know. And then thegainnetwork.com, and it's the GAIN, and then there's 2 N's. It's gain and then network.com. And you can keep up with what we're doing there. We do Martin Bingesser, my colleague in Switzerland, we do a Gaincast bi-weekly, every other week, where sometimes we have guests, sometimes we just talk about stuff that we're interested in and that. So, yeah, and I'm on Twitter, right? Twitter at Coach Gambetta.
Yeah.
Somebody asked me, I'm going to write a tweet about this, but I'll tell you, it's somebody said, well, how many followers do you have? What did I say? I don't know. And I go, I don't know. And they asked me, well, why don't you know? And I said, I really don't care. And then they said, well, why do you tweet? Well, I get these ideas. I kind of like to share them, and maybe somebody will give me some feedback, and say, Vern, you're just full of it. Or, yeah, I never thought of that. Have you thought of this? So that's why I do it. And if I don't know, I don't know if I have 20 followers or 20 million. My daughter put me on there. She said it would be good to help me promote Gain, but she's in sports marketing. But anyway, it's a funny world we live in. I grew up without we had a party line for anybody over 70, where, you shared a phone line with 3 other people, so you could pick up the phone and listen to them talking and say, I need to use the phone. So it's kind of funny to live in the world we live in. So anyway, so.
I was going to say, that's what 50 plus years of coaching will do, eh?
Yeah, it makes you a little dingy sometimes too, but it's a great ride. I hope I can keep it going. So anyway.
Well, as I said, Vern, I've learned tons from you from consuming your content through various different mediums. But thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Todd. It's been a joy. Really good questions and good conversation. And best of luck in your professional development, your career, and best of luck on your podcast.
Thank you very much, Vern.